بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alright, so to pick up where we left off last time with Bidayat al-Abid wa Kifayat al-Zahid by the great Abdurrahman al-Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Ba'li rahimahullah ta'ala. In our last session together we were looking at the prohibitions of Ihram, where he highlights 9 prohibitions, and we went through those one at a time, unpacking some of the very terse legal language you can find in this primer. And we concluded at the Faslun fil Fidyah, which is essentially a section on the expiations. So basically, when you commit a violation within Ihram, there are numerous different types of expiations that must be fulfilled to make up for that violation. And so the Imam opens here and he says, وَهِيَ مَا يَجِبُ بِسَبَبِ إِحْرَامٍ أَوْ حَرَمٍ فَيُخَيَّرُ بِفِدْيَةِ حَلْقٍ وَإِزَالَةِ أكثر من شعرتين أو ظفرتين أو ظفرين وطيب ولبس مخيط وتغطية رأس ذكر ووجه امرأة بين صيام 3 أيام أو إطعام 6 مساكين كل مسكين مد بر أو نصف صاع من غيره أو ذبح شاة. So basically, he opens and he says, expiation is what becomes obligatory on account of Ihram or the Haram. Meaning the expiation is associated with these two states. Either you're in Ihram or you're in the Haram. You could be in Ihram and in the Haram. You could just be in Ihram, or you could just be in the Haram without being in Ihram. So he starts highlighting these by saying, for shaving, removing more than 2 hairs or 2 nails, applying perfume, wearing sewn garments, or covering the head of a man or the face of a woman, one has the choice between fasting 3 days or feeding 6 poor persons, each poor person a mud of wheat or 1/2 sa'a of something else, or slaughtering a sheep. Okay, so right away introducing the Fidyah. In a very broad sense of the word, it's a compensatory duty. As he mentions here, وَهِيَ مَا يَجِبُ, it's something that's obligatory, and it's triggered either by violating Ihram, the restrictions that we've discussed previously, or by certain violations that are specific to the Haram, the sanctuary. And we understand that there are 2 sanctuaries, that of Mecca and that of Medina, and each has unique rules. Okay, so we're going to unpack that in a little bit, inshallah. So he says, for shaving, removing more than 2 hairs or 2 nails, applying perfume, wearing sewn garments, or covering the head of a man or the face of a woman, one has the choice between fasting 3 days or feeding 6 poor persons, each poor person a mud of wheat or 1/2 sa'a of something else, or slaughtering a sheep. So this is kind of like the classic Fidyah of choice, as he mentions ala at-takhir. You get to pick between fasting, as he mentions here, between fasting 3 days, feeding 6 poor persons. Each poor person is given 1 mud. That's a 1/4 sa'a, which is basically a double-handed scoop of wheat, or 1/2 sa'a, which is 2 times, basically 2 double-handed scoops of other staple foods. And that would include things like dates, or raisins, or barley, etc. Or you could pick between those 2, or slaughtering 1 sheep. And this cause is any of the listed acts done intentionally without excuse. So more than 2 hairs or nails, this marks the threshold for this level of the Fidyah. We've discussed, we may discuss what happens with 1 singular nail or singular hair that's been intentionally removed. So this marks the threshold there. 1 or 2, here we'll add it to this part, 1 or 2 hairs or nails requires 1 feeding, only feeding 1 or 2 poor persons. So if you just take off 1 nail, this is intentionally, you've clipped the nail, or you've pulled the nail, or you've plucked the hair, or whatever it may be. 1 or 2, each per 1 is feeding 1 poor person, or 2 if it was 2 nails or 2 hairs. And then once you get past that more than 2 hairs or nails, this is where you start to get into that choice. 3 days, 6 poor persons, or slaughtering the actual animal. And also, it's noted that the food should be wholesome, and where possible, served with a condiment like idam, as noted by the author himself in Kashf al-Mukhaddarat. Right, so not only are you going to give the animal, slaughtering it and preparing it, but you're going to give something with it to serve, like a full meal, essentially. He says, وَفِي جَزَاءِ صَيْدٍ بَيْنَ مِثْلِيٍّ أَوْ تَقْوِيمِهِ بِدَرَاهِمٍ يَشْتَرِي بِهَا طَعَامًا يُجْزِئُ فِي فِطْرَةٍ فَيُطْعِمُ كُلَّ مِسْكِينٍ مُدُّ بُرٍّ أَوْ نِصْفُ صَاعٍ مِنْ غَيْرِهِ أو يصوم عن طعام كل مسكين يوما وبين إطعام أو صيام في غير مثلي. So the next section talks about hunting. For hunting game, that is, one has the choice, if it has a like kind, between an analogous animal. Am I saying that word right? An analogous animal. Do you want to double check the pronunciation of my words? I don't mind. Between an analogous animal or appraising its value in dirhams and purchasing food of the type valid for fitrah, then feeding each poor person a mud of wheat or 1/2 sa' of something else, or fasting 1 day for each poor person in place of the food. So basically here, if the hunted animal has an established animal which basically fits into its equivalent from livestock, for example, a gazelle would be a sheep. Okay, and we're going to look at the definitions that have been already provided for us. The muhrim may, number 1, offer the similar animal as a hadi, like a sacrifice, slaughtered and distributed to the poor of the Ḥaram, not donated alive. It's prepared, it's been processed. That's 1. Or pay its appraised value and buy equivalent food for the poor. The standards of that food is the same for fitrah. Or fast 1 day poor person in place of each portion of food. So that's the first part. If there is an analogous animal. If it has no like kind, the choice is between feeding and fasting. Basically, you don't get that issue of being able to slaughter another animal. And this would include most birds. There's no like kind. So the person chooses between feeding the poor by value or fasting 1 day per person. The value would be based on what the local market value is according to the experts. They understand the value of such animals. And they would say, well, today that animal would go in the market for X amount of dirhams or whatever the currency is, and then you would utilize that amount in order to purchase the foodstuffs required. And then you would know how much food you have based on how it's distributed per person, etc. And then you can make a determination whether you wanted to actually distribute the food or you wanted to go and fast those days for the amount of people you would feed. He goes on and he says, وَإِنْ عَدِمَ مُتَمَتِّعٌ أَوْ قَارِنٌ الْهَدْيَ صَامَ 3 أيام في الحج والأفضل جعل آخرها يوم عرفة و7 إذا رجع لأهله والمحصر إذا لم يجده صام 10 أيام ثم حل وتسقط بنسيان في لبس وطيب وتغطية رأس. If a mutamatти' or qarin, you remember these are the types of rites that you can make for Hajj, you have 3 different types of rites. And right now we're looking at the 2, mutamatti and qarin. If they cannot find the sacrificial animal, وَإِنْ عَدِمَ مُتَمَتِّعٌ, basically it means they don't have one. They fast 3 days during Hajj. And it's best to make the last of them the day of Arafah. Meaning you finish the last of the 3 days on the day of Arafah. And the day of Arafah is on what day? The 9th day, which means you got to back that up 3 days, 9, 8, and 7. 7th is when you would start. 8 and 9. So you already know whether you have it or you don't have it prior to embarking upon your first day of the rites and rituals. You're already in Ihram more than likely. And now you're going to proceed fasting those 3 days. As a recommendation, it ends on that day. If you need to push it further, then okay, as long as it's done before the Hajj is concluded, you would have been able to make up for the fact that you didn't have the sacrificial animal. And then 7 when you return back to your family. Yom Tarawiyah, which is Yom of the 8th day. You can have Ayyam Tashriq. It's possible. It needs to be done prior to concluding. Have to have the 3 days, yeah. And this is called Fidyah ala tartib. Before we had takhir, which means to choose, and tartib means an order. And the order here is not an option. You don't get to pick like we did in the other one. So the hadi, which is the animal that you're sacrificing, is primary here. And so if it's unavailable or unaffordable, fasting replaces it. The 3 days are to be fasted during the time of Hajj, after entering Ihram and before the day of Nahr, he says. And it's preferable to make the 3rd on Arafah. The remaining 7 are fasted upon completing the Hajj rites or after returning home. The fasts do not need to be consecutive, but the days of Mina are excluded, according to Imam al-Ba'li. So it has to be done right away. One who is prevented a muhsar and cannot find it fasts 10 days, then releases themselves. Basically meaning that tahallul, to come out of the state of Ihram. For one prevented from completing the rites due to illness, whether they've been blocked or there's danger on the road, fasting 10 days replaces the hadi. After this, the muhsar may release themselves from Ihram. The expiation is waived when the violation occurs out of forgetfulness in the case of wearing libs al-makhit, fi libsin wa tibin. That's what he means here when he says wearing, meaning wearing the clothing that is stitched or fitted, perfume having been applied, or covering the head. So this fidya that we're looking at is waived in these 3 cases. So wearing stitched clothing, applying perfume, covering the head, or for a man, or the face of a woman. If this is done out of forgetfulness, whether it's done out of ignorance or it's done out of coercion, provided it is removed immediately, that you have to remove it immediately. Once you remember, for example, or you come into knowledge that you can't do that. Someone says, hey, you're not allowed to cover your head. And then right away, you have to remove the covering from your head, or whatever the infraction is here. Because the moment that you either remember, or you have been taught, or the coercion is no longer present, and you do not remove it, it means you're intentionally keeping it on. So now you're in violation, and the expiation is not waived in this case because it's done intentionally. If one delays without excuse, the continuation of the act becomes a new violation and requires a fidya. Does not apply to hunting or other damages involving compensation, meaning that we're not considering these issues of forgetfulness, etc. Because this is not, these 3 things don't have anything to do with what they call itlaf, which means the destruction of something or the loss of something. Like if if you wear clothing, it's not destroying, it's not like clipping a nail or a hair, it's not like killing an animal where the thing is a loss. It's just removed, no problem. Yes. Yeah, that's the issue we discussed last time. Yeah, this is our last class issue about wearing leather socks versus sandals. So yeah, sandals should be worn so as to avoid covering the feet. And here the exception is clear that you can wear leather socks when you don't have sandals. So you don't have to go barefoot. You can't wear socks. You can't wear leather socks unless you don't have unless you don't have sandals. The socks are permitted as an exception when a person doesn't have sandals to cover or to wear on their feet. Yeah, it's like an exception to the rule. You can only wear that when you don't have sandals. Sandals are what are expected to be worn during Ihram. Yep. He says, وَكُلُّ هَدْيٍ أَوْ إِطْعَامٍ فَلِمَسَاكِينِ الْحَرَمِ إِلَّا فِدْيَةَ أَذَى وَلُبْسٍ وَنَحْوِهِمَا فَحَيْثُ وُجِدَ سَبَبُهَا وَيُجْزِئُ الصَّوْمُ بِكُلِّ مَكَانٍ وَالدَّمُ شَاةٌ أَوْ سُبُعُ بَدَنَةٍ أَوْ سُبُعُ بَقَرَةٍ. Every sacrificial animal or feeding is for the poor of the Haram, except the expiation for harm or annoyance. That's fidyatul adha. That's how it's termed. It has a specific meaning, of course. Wearing the clothing that is stitched and fitted and the like, which is given wherever its cause occurs. Right, so al-fidya, involving slaughter or feeding connected to Ihram or the Haram violations that we've just described, must be distributed among the poor of the Haram. So it might be that you're in Ihram and you've committed a violation and you're not inside the Haram yet. You're making your way there. You've committed a violation and now you have to slaughter or you have to feed. You'll have to wait until you get into the Haram in order to distribute that to the poor of the sanctuary. Exceptions include the fidya of harm, al-adha, wearing perfume, wearing clothing, or similar personal violations. They may be discharged and distributed wherever these things occur. At the moment that they occur, you can distribute them right then and there and take care of that so that it's no longer burdening you. And this is including whether you're inside the Haram or outside of the Haram. Let's see what's next. وَيُجْزِئُ الصَّوْمُ بِكُلِّ مَكَانٍ. Fasting suffices in every place. Fasting as an alternative for any type of fidya may be performed wherever you are without restriction to Mecca. So in the event that we've done one of those choices, or we've decided on fasting, whether it's by choice or otherwise, then you can begin your fasting outside of the Haram. You don't have to wait until you get in there. It's basically showing the distinction between when you have to offer food or sacrifice an animal as a fidya versus just fasting, right? Because your fasting is not going to be of any benefit except to yourself. You're not going to be helping the poor of the Haram out by doing so. The blood sacrifice is a sheep, or 1/7 of a camel, or 1/7 of a cow. This is what they call a dem, meaning blood. And this is how it's to be carried out. A full camel or cow may be offered voluntarily and counts as a single complete sacrifice, which is even more virtuous, such that you could offer something greater as your expiation, but it would count as one animal. So you couldn't stack them up and say, I'm going to offer 7 sacrifices in one animal. The next section is about appraisal of game animals. فصل في جزاء الصيد وهو ضربان ما له مثل من النعم فيجب فيه ذلك المثل وهو نوعان أحدهما قضت فيه الصحابة ومنه في النعامة بدنة وفي حمار الوحش وبقره وإيل وتيتل ووعل. I'm not familiar with any of these animals, even in the English language, so you'll have to bear with me. ووعل بقرة وفي الضبع كبش وفي الغزال شاة وفي الوبر والضب جدي وفي اليربوع جفرة لها 4 أشهر وفي الأرنب عناق دون الجفرة وفي الحمام وهو كل ما عب الماء وهدر شاة. 2 categories, he says, for these animals. The first is that which has an analogous type among livestock, and that's what we discussed previously, just alluded to that. And now he's going to highlight what the definitions of those are. And the like kind is obligatory therein. So in the event that there is an analogous animal, that animal has to be offered. It is of 2 kinds. The first of the 2 is what the companions adjudicated. Meaning the companions have already ruled on this issue. And they've identified this animal, its like kind is that. And this animal's like kind is that. And so on and so forth. And it includes the ostrich, for which is a camel. The ostrich is that big old bird that runs around chasing after people, lays the big eggs. They're valuable eggs, not just for what's inside. We talked about the shell being utilized for different things. The wild donkey, wild cow, antelope, hartebeest, and ibex, for which is a cow. The aardwolf, for which is a ram. Aardwolf is bubba here. Bubba is also translated as the hyena. I often translate bubba as hyena. Right, the hyena is a carnivorous animal. Yeah, but its bubba is also translated as hyena. But aardwolf is from the same kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, family, genus, species. It might be from the same genus. It might be from the same genus, maybe. Yeah, it's definitely a relative. The aardwolf is a relative of the hyena, except that the aardwolf is largely an insectivore and not a carnivore. Right? It's very rare, according to what I've understood, that the aardwolf would eat another, become a carnivore. Mostly they feed on insects. So it's a very different case in that way. And this is what Ibn al-Qayyim concluded, by the way, that it wasn't the carnivorous hyena that many people assume it to be. But because we understand the carnivorous animals aren't edible in the first place. So you would not be killing that animal to consume. That would be more of like an animal you may kill in order to protect yourself, and in that case it wouldn't be one you'd have to pay for the violating, the rights or the rights of the Ihram. So the aardwolf, if that's how we want to go with it, that's what I think we should go with, for which is a ram. The gazelle, for which is a sheep. The hyrax and lizard, for which is a kid. And jerboa, for which is a 4-month-old she-goat. The rabbit, for which is a she-kid younger than a she-goat. And the hamam, not hammam, the hamam, which is a bird, meaning every bird that drinks by drawing water into its beak and coos, for which is a sheep. And no athani, so that basically gives you it's straightforward. There's no need for no need for explanation. If it's this animal, then you do this. This is the animal that you slaughter in its place. And so on and so forth. النوع الثاني ما لم تقضي فيه الصحابة ويرجع فيه إلى قول عدلين خبيرين والضرب الثاني ما لا مثل له وهو باقي الطير وفيه قيمته مكانه. So the second of these two types is that which the companions did not adjudicate, and it is referred to the judgment of 2 upright and knowledgeable assessors. Here is where there are animals that could potentially have a like kind, if you will. There is a like kind, but it wasn't something established by way of the companions' ruling. it would be something that is left up to two upright, knowledgeable assessors. The assessors are those that are going to assess the situation. You're going to say, look, this is the animal that I killed. Now, is there a like kind for this such that I can sacrifice it as a fidya? And they would know based on based on that field, that specialty. They would know that the form of livestock that is appropriate as a replacement, essentially. And we would need two upright, knowledgeable assessors to determine this in order to reach a level of certainty. That's what we want to establish. A level of certainty we want to establish by having two as opposed to just one. Much like two witnesses for witnessing a contract or witnessing the birth of the new moon for the majority of the months, etc. A single assessor will not suffice. And the killer, meaning the one that's killed the animal, may serve as one of the assessors. If they're qualified, then they would know. And they just need a corroborating source to also support the conclusion that, look, I killed this animal while in Ihram or in the Ḥaram, and that animal has a like kind, which is a sheep, for example. That's the replacement animal. But now I need one more person to corroborate that. I need another specialist. And his friend is probably a specialist because he works in the industry of assessing these types of animals. So he calls up his friend and he says, hey, it's a sheep, right? And the guy goes, yeah, it's a sheep. Or no, they have it out and they can't figure it out and they just got to move on to the next assessor and come to some type of conclusion. So basically the task is to match the animal based on formal resemblance, to identify the proper like kind. So they're going to look at the various different, qualities of the animal. The second category here is that which has no analogous type, namely the remaining species of birds, for which the due is their appraised value at the place of violation. Right? Most of the birds, there's no replacement type here. This includes all game with no like kind among livestock. So a bird, it would be. It's most of the time they're not going to offer a sheep for that. Chicken. It's got to be a cow or a camel or a sheep here in this case. We're not doing any chickens for Fidyah, by the way. As much as we eat chickens these days, right? More available. So this is the remaining birds, even large species like geese, cranes, other waterfowl. They don't have an analogous type. The obligation is to appraise them monetarily, determine what the amount they would retrieve in the marketplace if they were killed and then sold, and then in that case you would basically take that money and utilize it to handle the situation. Sanctuary of Mecca and Medina is the next section. He says, فَصْلٌ وَحَرُمَ صَيْدُ حَرَمِ مَكَّةَ وَحُكْمُهُ حُكْمُ صَيْدِ الْإِحْرَامِ وَحَرُمَ قَطْءُ شَجَرِهِ وَحَشِيشِهِ حَتَّى الشَّوْكِ وَلَوْ ضَرَّ وَالسِّوَاكِ وَنَحْوِهِ وَالْوَرَقِ إِلَّا الْيَابِسَ وَالْإِذْخِرَ وَالْكَمْأَةَ والفقع والثمرة وما زرعه آدمي حتى من الشجر ويباح رعي حشيشه وانتفاع بما زال أو انكسر بغير فعل آدمي ولو لم يبن وتضمن الشجرة الصغيرة عرفا بشاة وما فوقها ببقرة يخير بين ذلك وبين تقويمه ويفعل بقيمته كجزاء صيد وحشيش بقيمته. Here, we're talking about hunting in the Ḥaram of Mecca. As I indicated, the sanctuaries, one of Mecca, one of Medina. This is specific to Mecca. He says hunting in the Ḥaram of Mecca is prohibited, and its ruling is like that of hunting while in Ihram. Cutting its trees and herbage is prohibited, or is it herbage? I don't know these words, man. I don't know how to say these words anymore. I feel so confidence shot. Even thorns. Yeah, cannot chop down even thorns, even if harmful, as are siwak and the like. and leaves, except what is dry, sweet grass, truffles, mushrooms, fruit, and whatever a human has planted, even trees. So, truffles, mushrooms, fruit, as long as, this is the exception by the way, and whatever a human has planted. So in the event that you're in the Ḥaram, of course, and you're planting your own garden, then you can tend to your garden, you can chop down and consume, etc. like that. Or if you plant trees and things on your own accord, we're talking about the wild vegetation of the sanctuaries to be left as it is. Grazing on its herbage is permitted and benefiting from what has fallen off or broken without human action, even if not fully detached. A small tree by custom entails a sheep, what is above it a cow, and one has a choice between that and the valuation, and its value is treated like the compensation for game, while herbage is liable for its market value. So here, basically, hunting in the Ḥaram of Mecca is prohibited, and its ruling is that of hunting while in Ihram. So the prohibition applies equally to both the muhram and the non-muhram. If you're in the Ḥaram, it's one rule. Whether you're there for Ihram or whether you're there just because either you live there or you're visiting there, and this is according to consensus, the rule applies to everyone. Whoever destroys any game within the Ḥaram, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, free or slave, adult or child, must pay the compensation required for a muhram for that same species. That's when we now contend with the various different types of species of animals that you may have killed. Those that are permitted to kill, that is. Those that are consumable. Right? If you have an animal that's a predatorial animal that could cause harm, then that's another situation altogether. Cutting its trees and herbage is prohibited, even thorns, even if harmful, as are siwak and the like, and leaves. So again, this goes back to the natural growing vegetation of the sanctuary, regardless of its size or type, and even those whose removal might seem beneficial, like getting rid of thorny bushes and stuff like that. Like we need to move things out of the way because I want to set up a fruit stand here or something. Anything cut from these prohibited categories becomes unlawful for the cutter or others to benefit from, similar to game killed by a muhrim. Except what is dry, sweet grass, truffles, mushrooms, fruit, and whatever humans have planted, even trees. Of course, this is an exemption from the prohibition because they're not considered part of the living growth. Like in the event that it's dried, and it's dead, it's no longer a living, growing thing. Or if it was produced, as I mentioned, by way of human cultivation, this is an exception. It's excluded from the sanctuary of the Haram's natural vegetation, so it can be harvested or can be removed. Grazing as well is permitted, benefiting, meaning your animal grazing. Hopefully not you out there grazing on the sweet grass. Whatever, bro. Who knows what happens today? I mean, you know, I identify as a cat half the time anyway, right? So I'm out there just, yeah. I identify as a cow, so I'm out there chewing away at the stuff, you know, whatever. Okay, so grazing, meaning your animal grazing out there, is permitted, benefiting from what has fallen off or broken without human action, even if not fully detached, is also permissible. So the animals that can feed directly on the vegetation in the Ḥaram, though a person may not harvest that for fodder. Your animal you can let them graze, but you can't go out, cut it down, and then bring back into the pen. It's basically the distinction that they're trying to make here in this passage. And then anything that falls off naturally, like branches that have dropped by way of the wind blowing or something of that nature, broken leaves or fruits, if it drops, is lawful to collect and benefit from them. Even if it's not fully detached. Like it's broken off and it's like hanging by a little bit, you know, like it's already detached now. So it's not a part of that item anymore. He says a small tree by custom entails a sheep, what is above it a cow, and one has a choice between that and valuation, and its value is treated like the compensation for game. So this allows some wiggle room for customary valuation or estimation, a customary determination. That means what's prevalent at the time, what's considered the the determination of the particular time for that particular item. So there's not, basically what I'm saying is there's not a set amount that we have here for a small tree by custom, meaning what is the tree? The amount of that tree is a foot? Is it 2 feet? Is it 3 feet? Is that considered a small tree or not? So that's where we would refer to like what's considered customary in that particular region at the time. So when it's determined that it's a small tree, it requires a sheep, while a medium or large tree requires a cow. Again, what's a medium tree? What's a large tree? That's where we would need people that understand, kind of the local flora and fauna. Yes, getting our confidence back. Starting to wade into the SAT words a little bit. Yeah. So one may either slaughter and distribute the animal to the poor in the Ḥaram, or pay the assessed value and distribute it as per rules of the jaza' as-sayd, which is basically a compensation for game. Okay? And then other types of vegetation is liable for its market value. Grass, similar growth, compensated by way of financial value rather than substituting for an animal of like kind. And a cut branch is liable according to its degree and value, and if the tree, grass, or leaves grow, they regrow after being cut, the obligation for compensation is no longer applicable here. Yes, sir. Cutting a branch? No, you're not. You're cutting something off of it, though. To cut a branch is liable according to its degree in value. A cut branch, what does he say there? Yeah, he doesn't elaborate. Yeah, but if you go into like a larger work, then they elaborate on these things. Yeah, so in his Kashf al-Mukhaddarat, which was the explanation of Ibn Balban's Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat, he goes into greater length explaining this issue, and he says that a branch, when you cut a branch off, so we're not talking about removing an entire tree, whether it's a small, medium, or large, you just cut a branch off the tree, it's liable according to the value of that branch, basically. So the degree of its value, that's what you're liable for. Okay, so that gives us a general idea of how these things function within, and some of the rules that apply while you're visiting the Ḥaram. Goes on and he says, وَكُرِهَ إِخْرَاجُ تُرَابِ الْحَرَمِ وَحِجَارَتِهِ إِلَى الْحِلِّ لَا مَاءَ زَمْزَمْ وتستحب المجاورة بمكة وهي أفضل من المدينة وتضاعف الحسنة والسيئة بمكان وزمان فاضل وحرم صيد حرم المدينة وقطع شجره وحشيشه لغير حاجة علف وقتب ونحوهما ولا جزاء. Very different rules when we get into Medina. However, before we get into that, the second sanctuary, he says it's disliked to remove the soil or stones of the Ḥaram to the Hil, meaning the non-sacred lands, meaning going outside of the Ḥaram. To remove soil or stones from the Ḥaram. Excluding Zamzam water. Residing in Mecca is recommended, and it is more virtuous than Medina. Good and evil deeds are multiplied in a virtuous place and time. In the Ḥaram of Medina, hunting is prohibited and cutting its trees and herbage is prohibited, except for a need of fodder and pack saddle and the like, and there is no compensation. So it is disliked to remove the soil or stones of the Ḥaram to the Hil, excluding Zamzam water. This is what Imam Ahmad radiallahu anhu had to say. He held that the soil of the Ḥaram should not be taken out nor brought into it from outside. Meaning you don't bring outside soil into the Ḥaram, you don't bring the Ḥaram soil outside. And the same applies to its stones. The stones is even more severe than taking soil. Removing soil or stones carries a stronger degree of dislike than bringing them in. Right? So basically, you're not going to go there and start collecting the dirt for whatever purpose and things and then bring it home. Like, I want a little bit of Mecca I want a little bit of the sanctuary with me. Yeah, there are people that do this. Yeah, there are people that do this. So this is disliked. Right? That's what we have to understand. وَكُرِهَ إِخْرَاجُ تُرَابِ الْحَرَمِ وَحِجَارَتِهِ. It is disliked to remove these things. If you do it, all right, whatever. Yeah, it's disliked to do that. Disliked, yeah. Imagine how many visitors are we getting today? Millions of visitors today. Everyone brings a handful of dirt home. Safa and Marwa, well, they're covered now, but I mean, like, imagine the Rumat, the Jebel Rumat, the Archer's Mount. All the millions of people that come in, and that would be just leveled after a couple of years probably. Take a handful of dirt home. For the barakah. Yeah. Or the memories. When it's what? It's makruh. Yeah, makruh. I don't know. Everyone has their thing. Dhikriyat. You got to keep some memories. Souvenir. You got to have some memories, exactly. Take some stones. It comes to mind right away. I mean, why not? I mean, it never occurred to me, but it does occur to many. It'll be like something nice to hold in my pocket. We are. Yeah, that's why they mention these things here. And even such a small treatise is mentioned here because it's obviously an issue that's quite widespread. It warranted mention in such a small, concise book, which the author is very, very particular about what he's adding so that it can stay very short. And so obviously it's an issue that needs to be brought to the attention of the masses. Disliked to remove that water. Zamzam, of course, as we know, is not disliked because Zamzam, he says, replenishes naturally. That's the wisdom behind that there, according to the jurist. Why is the soil and the rocks being removed disliked? Well, it's not naturally reoccurring. And so, as I described, you'll start pulling away the land mass, like pulling away at the structural integrity of these holy sites, for no, you're going to leave it in a worse state than when you arrived. Whereas the water of Zamzam, we've told you, people will drink and drink and drink and it won't run out. It's naturally replenishing, so you could take as much as you want. And you can carry it outside of the region and it's going to keep refilling. So there's no harm from taking the Zamzam water and drinking to your fill. He says, residing in Mecca is recommended and it is more virtuous than Medina. So basically living near the sacred house, this is mujawara, means to be neighbors, if you will. Residing in the sanctuary is praiseworthy, of course. Mecca holds a greater value or virtue, if you will, than Medina due to its sanctuary and its rights. The Prophet ﷺ indicated this. The sanctuary of Mecca is very unique, and we can see it in the rulings. So when you have a violation in the sanctuary, there's a fidya, or there's a jaza, if you will, a recompense that has to be paid for the violation. Whereas in Medina, it's haram to do it, but there's no recompense. Which it's like a degree. It's a degradation in degree, if you will. And then, of course, the value of praying in the Ḥaram Mecca versus that of Medina, etc. But the superiority that's being mentioned here is referring to the land, Mecca versus Medina, not referring to the resting place of the Prophet ﷺ. For that is far superior. Is the Prophet ﷺ there? Far superior because it's the best of Allah's creation. And that's where he lies, right there. Right, so we're not talking about that as a part of it, a whole. That's a unique element and aspect of Medina, is the Prophet ﷺ there. Good and evil deeds are multiplied in a virtuous place and time, which means the acts that you commit while in these sacred locations, they carry both greater weight and reward as well as sin in the event that it's disobedience. So the seriousness of the sin in these sanctuaries is heightened. Disobedience, the recompense for that intensifies because you're in such a sacred place. In the Ḥaram of Medina, hunting is prohibited and cutting its trees and herbage is prohibited except for a need of fodder and pack saddle and the like, and there is no compensation, as I alluded to. So the Ḥaram of Medina, which lies between the two lava plains, Bain al-Harratain, and you note that if you've ever traveled, they have these large fields of black volcanic rock, and that's from Mount Thawr to Ayr, and these are large mountains which also identify other markers. These things and in those mountains is also a protected sanctuary. So hunting is unlawful there. Cutting its trees and grass is likewise prohibited, but exceptions are made for genuine needs, such as animal fodder. So in this case, you don't just have to let your animals roam, then it's something that you can harvest, and pack saddle stuffing. You would utilize some of the vegetation perhaps in order to pack out your saddle stuffing, or for tools if you needed to create tools in order to utilize the wood from the trees, etc., or supports. And there's no financial compensation in these violations, of course, unlike the Ḥaram of Mecca. And that's where we wrap up for this session. The next time we gather, we'll be looking at entering into Mecca, and we'll begin describing the actual rites and rituals from one step to the next, going through Ḥajj, ʿUmrah, and pushing on until we get to how we deal with sacrificial animals. Jazakallah khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.